I love to talk to other people about their differing opinions, especially about important things like religion. Is there a God? Is Christianity true? I love to hear other opinions because I like to think about the range of alternative opinions outside my own that could exist. But even more than that, I like to think about the way that people have reasoned to those conclusions. I like to see why it is that people believe something different than myself. They looked at a series of reasons, of evidences, and they came to a different conclusion than I did. And I always want to know, what are those evidences? Is that a more reasonable path to their conclusion than mine was to mine? One thing, though, that's always really struck me, I've heard this repeatedly, usually from atheists, certainly from non-believers, is I'll hear, well, even if the God of the Bible was true, even if he really existed, I still wouldn't be a Christian because the God of the Bible is so distasteful, so evil, judgmental, whatever the descriptor is. They don't like the way that the God of the Bible is. And so their feeling is, even if that it could be proven to them in that moment that the God of the Bible really exists, they still would not become a Christian because they would still be against that type of God, because that's not the type of God that they would want to be obedient to follow. I was recently listening to a conversation between two Christians. They were talking about kind of debating issues of theology, going really deep into theology. And during this conversation, what kind of struck me was one of the Christians said, in my reading of the Bible, it seems that the Bible describes God as being a certain way. And the other Christian who is arguing against that idea made a statement saying, that doesn't really appeal to me. I don't really feel comfortable with saying God is that way. And their reason was, or one of their objections, they said, why does God have to be that way? You're saying that the Bible teaches God is a certain way. Why does he have to be that way? It almost sounded like one of those non-believers I'd talked to. Because God is not the way that they wished him to be, they just simply did not want to believe or put their faith in that type of a God. It's interesting. I've heard similar types of reasoning whenever I'm hearing discussions about philosophy or religion, especially anything religion, spiritual. People will use their own feelings on the topic or on the conclusion as one of the evidences for whether they should believe it or not. They'll follow a series of evidence, a series of reasons, but then when they are getting close to the conclusion, they'll consider, well, do I like the conclusion or not? Do I like that kind of God? Do I want to obey that type of religion? And then their own opinion is considered to be a piece of evidence like all the others. And essentially, if they don't like the conclusion, they will often choose not to believe it. But we don't really see, at least I hope we don't see, that type of reasoning in a lot of other realms of the world. If a doctor is doing some type of medical research, they're trying to come up with a cure, a vaccine for some disease, they're going to do a series of these clinical trials. They're going to try to figure out what's the best medicine, the best treatment for whatever it is I'm trying to cure or help. If that doctor comes in and says, hey, I'm going to test 3 new types of medication, but really I'm pretty confident this one is going to be the one that does it. This one is going to be ultimately the cure, but we'll try a couple others alongside. And so they start doing the clinical trial, and they start realizing that the one that they expected to do really well isn't doing that hot, but one of the ones that they kind of had just thrown in there just to see ends up being really effective. Well, we would hope that a good doctor, good researcher would go, okay, this one is showing a lot of promise. This one that I didn't really expect, I didn't think it was going to be that big of a deal, but now this one's doing really well. Hopefully, we're going to spend more time and energy and research into that area because we're going to try to figure out, hey, this seems to be the most reasonable or the most likely avenue to go down in terms of research to find that cure. I would hope that doctor doesn't go back to the original medicine that they thought was going to do good and say, well, even though the research is saying that this isn't actually as effective as I thought it was going to be, my opinion was that this is the one that I wanted to use all along, so I'm going to keep doing research in this area and ignore the other one, even though the evidence kind of suggests that the other one is really the real route to the cure. I mean, we would hope that a doctor wouldn't do that. That would not only would be irresponsible, but immoral. Potentially, we would say that that person is corrupt for intentionally ignoring something that could help people to do what they personally wanted, right? Their personal opinion about the conclusion or about the evidence they were seeing is not really evidence. It's not a reason on its own. Typically, we would follow a series of evidence, a series of reasons. We'd look at all the evidence in the world around us, all the known facts, and then we come to a conclusion based on them. And then, once we have our conclusion, we think about our feelings about the conclusion and what should we do now with our feelings? Because the conclusion is going to be true regardless of our feelings. That's the thing about God is, God, if the God of the Bible exists, he's going to be the way that the Bible describes him, regardless of how I feel about him. So my feelings about whether or not I like him are not really evidences for whether or not he exists. Instead, that's more an issue of submission or obedience. And I definitely can understand where people are coming from when they say that they don't like the way that the God of the Bible is. I resonate with that feeling, at least at certain times. There's plenty of things that the God of the Bible wants from me that I don't always want to give him. I don't always want to give him my time, my energy, my obedience. There's certain things that God wants me to not do that I would kind of like to do. There's things that God will put me through or experiences that I'm going to have that I'm going to have some type of suffering, some type of pain, I'm going to experience some type of injustice in my life, or I'm going to see injustice in the lives of others that I'm not going to like, and I'm going to wish God would have acted differently in those circumstances. A lot of times I'll hear when couples will argue, I'll hear one partner will say, I love you, but I don't have to like you right now. And I resonate with that idea. A lot of times I wonder, is that the way that I feel about God? I understand the feeling that God might not be the way that we all want him to be. I'm sure that if it was up to me to create God, I would create him in some slightly different way. It probably wouldn't be as good as the way that he actually is. Actually, I know it wouldn't be. The Bible even kind of tells us that we should expect that we would not feel like what we want and what God wants are always in sync. The Bible repeatedly talks about our natural desires and the desires of God often being at odds, and that we are going to have to potentially let go of something that we want in order to be obedient to the real God that really exists. So the Bible isn't really surprised that we would feel this way. God knows that this would be a natural feeling to have. The question I would have is just, when we are reasoning about God, when we're approaching these issues of religion and spirituality, are we actually looking at what the evidence says and then following the conclusion? Or are we including our own feeling, our own opinion, our own, whether we like or don't like something, as a piece of evidence? Ultimately, whatever the truth is, whatever really exists, however reality really is, we have to deal with whether we like it or not. Now, I think that there's a lot to like about God. I love God. I think God has our best interests at heart. And I think that obedience to him is the best thing for us. But I can understand why someone, especially someone who doesn't have a close experience of God, would feel like, hey, if God's not the way I want him to be, why should I even go down that road of belief? But I would encourage you, whatever the evidence leads you to, whatever the evidence says is true, whatever the most reasonable belief is, that's the thing we should believe and deal with. It's beyond what our own opinion is. The reality is not going to bend based on what we feel, what we want to be true. Instead, let's examine what really is true. And then whatever is true, that's what we're going to deal with. If the God of the Bible really exists, if we really have a creator who created us, loves us, wants a relationship with us, wants us to have a relationship with them, then the most reasonable thing to do would be to be in relationship with that God. Really be obedient to that person. Try to love them back the way that they love us. That would be the most reasonable conclusion.